What happens when an undercover CEO goes from trimming hedges to exposing a criminal empire right inside his own luxury golf resort? Welcome back, brilliant minds and wise hearts. You're the kind of listener who knows that leadership isn't about titles, it's about action. Today's story is a roller coaster of betrayal, courage, and justice, where a young server is framed, a beloved legacy is threatened, and the quietest man on staff turns out to be the most powerful. Stay with us, because what unfolds next will restore your faith in character, second chances, and the quiet strength that changes everything. Rachel Myers tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her rusted Honda Civic, staring through the windshield at the sprawling Desert Pines Golf Resort. The rising Arizona sun bathed the clay-colored stone clubhouse in a golden glow, casting long shadows across the manicured greens and palm-lined entrance. It looked like paradise, exclusive, pristine, and far removed from the chaos of the life she was trying to leave behind. She inhaled deeply, her fingers trembling just slightly. This wasn't just another job. For Rachel, this was a lifeline. 3 months ago, she'd lost her last job as a hotel banquet server under suspicious circumstances. Accused of mishandling receipts, a claim she could never disprove, the rumor spread fast. Doors closed, friends distanced themselves. She knew she had one last chance to prove herself, to claw her way back to dignity. That chance was behind the wrought iron gates in front of her. As she stepped out of her car and adjusted the collar of her blazer, her eyes caught on an older man kneeling in the flower beds near the resort's circular drive. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, dusty boots, and moved with the steady rhythm of someone used to being ignored. He looked up briefly, nodding as their eyes met. She gave a polite smile before heading toward the staff entrance. Inside, a polished world awaited her. Glass chandeliers, white marble floors, and hushed voices. It smelled of money and lavender polish. A woman in heels and a tight bun barely glanced at her before saying, "Event staff entrance is to your left. You're late." Rachel's stomach clenched, but she didn't argue. She turned and walked briskly down the hall, her footsteps muffled by thick carpet and second-guessing. First impressions mattered here, and hers had already faltered. She reminded herself, second chances aren't given, they're earned, and she planned to earn hers with grace and grit, no matter how cold the stairs or how loud the kitchen rumors. Rachel had no connections, no safety net, and nothing left to lose. But she had eyes, instincts, and a quiet resolve not to be underestimated again. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man trimming the hedges outside had already noticed her, and he was far more than a groundskeeper. Because here at Desert Pines, not everything was manicured, and not every mask was made of makeup. Some masks hid power, and some, like Rachel's, hid a fight no one saw coming. Rachel stepped through the employee entrance and into the polished underbelly of Desert Pines Golf Resort, where elegance met tension in equal measure. The staff corridors were lined with framed photos of charity galas, championship golf tournaments, and holiday banquets featuring socialites in sequins and smiles. But behind the scenes, the energy buzzed with tightly wound precision. She was barely through the door when a tall, impeccably dressed woman with a clipboard appeared. "Rachel Myers?" the woman asked, her tone clipped. "I'm Lindsay Shaw, Events and Banquets Manager. You're shadowing today." Her gaze flicked over Rachel's attire with a subtle disapproval that needed no words. "We expect poise, promptness, and perfection here. This resort hosts CEOs, retired senators, and Fortune 500 weddings. You'll be representing all of that." As Lindsay led her through the grand dining room, Rachel took in the breathtaking view. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto the 18th green, where golfers in crisp polos lined up their putts under the desert sun. The chandeliers above them sparkled like ice in a tumbler of bourbon. Servers in matching black vests moved with efficiency, their voices low, their posture impeccable. "You'll meet the chef later," Lindsay said, lowering her voice. "Just don't take things personally." Rachel arched a brow. "He's brilliant, but volatile," Lindsay added, as if that excused what was coming. That introduction arrived soon enough, in the form of Chase Denning, the the resort's celebrity executive chef. He burst from the kitchen with a cutting board in hand and fury in his voice. "Who undercooked the duck confit again? Are we feeding dogs out there?" he roared at a sous chef who looked ready to vanish through the floor. Chase was tall, lean, with meticulously styled salt and pepper hair, and the smug arrogance of someone who once made it onto a cooking show and never let it go. He swept past Rachel without acknowledging her presence. "Charming, right?" a warm voice said beside her. Rachel turned to find Dante Cruz, the bartender, drawing a glass behind the bar with an easy smile. He screams louder than the blender on margarita night. "You'll get used to it, or you'll run. Most do." Rachel offered a wry smile, grateful for the kindness. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the groundskeeper again. This time silently coiling a hose just outside the window, his posture relaxed but his gaze focused inside, as if watching the staff with more interest than any gardener should. Paradise, it seemed, came with thorns. Rachel had barely completed her first week at Desert Pines when the small inconsistencies started to surface. Just enough to raise her eyebrows, but not enough to confirm suspicion. It began with the wine inventory. While restocking for a weekend wedding, she noticed that several bottles of rare vintages listed on the event sheet were nowhere to be found. Lindsay waved it off. Must be a miscount. Those crates come in and out fast. But when it happened again, this time with a case of truffle oil and specialty cheeses, Rachel started logging the discrepancies quietly in the Notes app on her phone. She wasn't trying to accuse anyone. Not yet. But something didn't feel right. Especially not in a place that prided itself on elite precision. One afternoon, she caught Chase berating a delivery man in the alley. "This is garbage," he snapped, pointing at a box of frozen duck breasts. "You think I'm feeding retirees or raccoons?" The delivery man apologized profusely, but Chase yanked the clipboard from him and signed with a flourish. What struck Rachel was what followed. Chase didn't take the rejected box back inside. Instead, he handed it off to a man in a nondescript black van parked discreetly behind the loading dock. No logos, no invoices, just a nod, a lift, and it was gone. That evening, she brought it up casually to Dante while polishing glassware. "Ever notice weird deliveries out back?" she asked. Dante's jaw tightened. "Don't go looking where you're not invited," he muttered. "It's safer that way." Rachel gave a half laugh, hoping he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. "You seem like a smart one," he added quietly. "So here's my advice. Watch. Learn. And don't speak unless you're ready to be a target." The words hung between them like the hum of an overworked freezer. Low, quiet, but undeniable. Even Lindsay, who had initially come off as briskly professional, seemed strained. She had become increasingly anxious in meetings with Chase, nodding quickly, avoiding eye contact, and rarely offering opinions. Once Rachel overheard Chase muttering, "You wouldn't want your old mistake coming back to haunt you, would you?" Lindsay had paled and left the room. From her corner of the world, Rachel was starting to piece things together. The missing items, the tense glances, the silences. And then there was Peter, the quiet groundskeeper who always seemed to be where the tension brewed. He was often nearby, trimming hedges, wiping golf carts, or refilling planters, but he always watched. He didn't speak much, but when their eyes met, Rachel saw something more than curiosity. She saw recognition. Something told her he knew. The line between discomfort and danger was officially crossed on a balmy Friday night, during a high-profile charity gala hosted on the upper terrace of Desert Pines. The event was buzzing with donors, champagne flutes, and white-gloved servers moving through candlelit tables under string lights. Rachel was coordinating wine service when she noticed something strange. Chase, the ever-dramatic chef, slipped out of the kitchen mid-service with a tightly sealed box. Premium seafood, she suspected, marked for the event. Minutes later, she spotted him in the alley behind the loading dock, handing it off to the same unmarked black van she'd seen earlier. The exchange was swift and secretive. Chase barely glanced around before the van pulled off into the night. Rachel's stomach twisted. Later, while closing up, Lindsay called Rachel into the small accounting office. "I need help reconciling the bar drawer," she said flatly, not meeting Rachel's eyes. "Something's not adding up." As Rachel counted the bills, she saw what Lindsay meant. Over $500, 0 cents in sales were missing from the till. Rachel double-checked the receipts. "Are we sure this isn't a mistake?" Lindsay stiffened. "Chase said you were the last to close the bar." Rachel blinked. "I was only serving wine. Dante handled the liquor." Lindsay pursed her lips. "Dante left early. You were the last one on shift." The implication sat heavily in the air. Rachel's hands turned clammy. "You think I took it?" she asked quietly. "I'm just telling you what was reported," Lindsay replied, already avoiding her gaze. The next morning, Rachel arrived to prep for a wedding brunch, only to find the entire event team already gathered in the main dining room. Chase stood at the center, his chef's coat pristine, a paper in his hand. "We have a problem," he announced. "A serious breach of trust." With theatrical flair, he held up a printed still image from a grainy security feed. "This," he pointed, "is footage of someone accessing the register at 11:42 p.m. last night. And that someone looks a lot like you, Rachel." The room turned to her in stunned silence. Rachel stared at the image. It was a woman in uniform, same build, same hairstyle, but the footage was low-res and shadowy. "That's not me," she said, voice shaking. "I left by 10. Ask Lindsay." But Lindsay said nothing. Chase stepped closer, a smug smirk on his lips. "So, you deny it?" he asked. Rachel's eyes scanned the room. Only Peter, watching silently from the doorway with a watering can in hand, didn't look away. Something in his expression said, "Hold on. This isn't over." Rachel sat on the edge of her bed that night, still dressed in her uniform, her hands clenched around a half-empty bottle of water she couldn't remember opening. Her mind raced with images from the day, Chase's smug accusation, Lindsay's silence, the way the staff had looked at her as if she were already guilty, her name, her reputation, the job she fought so hard to earn. It was all unraveling. She had sent out a dozen texts to Dante and even left a voicemail, but no response. Just as the silence became unbearable, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe. "Hello?" she asked cautiously. A calm, gravelly voice replied, "Rachel, it's Peter, from Desert Pines." Her breath caught. "The groundskeeper?" "Not exactly," he said. "I need to talk to you. I know you didn't steal anything, and I can prove it." She stood up, her pulse surging. "Why should I believe you?" Peter paused. "Because I've been watching, and because Chase has been stealing from this resort for months. You're not the first to notice, just the first he tried to silence publicly." Rachel gripped the phone tighter. "Then why hasn't anyone said anything?" "Fear," Peter said simply. "He built a culture where silence felt safer. Until now." He gave her an address just outside the property, an old maintenance shed near the east course, rarely used by staff. "Meet me at 6 a.m., he said. "Come alone." Before she could ask more, he hung up. The next morning, the sky still blushing with early light, Rachel pulled up near the edge of the golf course. The shed looked abandoned, but the door creaked open as she approached. Inside, Peter stood, not in his dusty gardener's hat, but in a clean polo and jeans, his posture straight and purposeful. Around him, old maintenance shelves had been transformed into a quiet command post, a laptop, folders of printed records, and a corkboard filled with notes, photos, and delivery slips. "I'm not the groundskeeper," Peter said, confirming what Rachel had already begun to suspect. "My name is Peter Langford. I own Desert Pines." She stared at him, stunned. "Why would someone like you be digging in flower beds and trimming hedges?" "Because I needed to know what was really happening here," he said. "And now I know. You were the final puzzle piece. With your help, I think we can end this. But we'll need to be smart. Are you ready?" Rachel took a long breath. She didn't feel ready, but she nodded anyway. "Let's take him down." Inside the dim maintenance shed, lit only by a desk lamp and early morning light slipping through warped wooden slats, Rachel stood shoulder to shoulder with Peter Langford. No longer the quiet man clipping hedges, but the calm, sharp-minded owner of Desert Pines. He spread out a stack of evidence across the table: vendor invoices, doctored inventory logs, delivery photos, and high-resolution surveillance stills from hidden cameras Peter had installed weeks earlier. The footage Chase showed yesterday was edited, Peter explained, clicking through side-by-side comparisons. The original clearly shows him entering the office alone at 11:30 p.m., opening the register and pocketing the cash. He wore a wig. It was meant to look like you. Rachel stared in disbelief. He really went that far? Peter nodded, grimly. And not just to frame you. He's been quietly funneling top-shelf ingredients out the back to his brother's restaurant in Sedona. I've traced at least 7 deliveries. As Peter walked her through the paper trail, Rachel couldn't help but ask, "Why do this yourself? Why not hire an investigator?" Peter hesitated, then pulled a worn photo from his wallet. "Because this place was my wife's dream," he said softly. "She designed the original layout, picked the flower beds, even chose the tableware. After she passed 3 years ago, I handed off operations and stepped back. I trusted Chase. He was one of her final hires." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But I've seen the changes. Employees quitting without explanation, guest complaints about food quality, and numbers that didn't add up. When I asked questions, I got polished lies. So I came back the only way I could get the truth, by becoming invisible." Rachel looked at the corkboard again. Chase's face appeared repeatedly, caught handing off product, signing off falsified logs, and exchanging envelopes with an unfamiliar man near the dumpster. It was all there, months of deception, caught in crisp detail. "He's smart," Peter said, "but arrogant. He never thought anyone was watching, and now that you've come forward, I think he's panicking." They spent the next hour rehearsing a plan. Rachel would return to work as though nothing had changed. Peter would quietly gather the final link, emails, and financial records tied to Chase's side dealings. When Rachel asked what came next, Peter's voice lowered. "We expose him publicly, where everyone he's bullied can see who he really is." Rachel nodded. The fear that had haunted her all week was still there, but now it had purpose, and that made all the difference. "Let's finish this," she said. It was just past 4 p.m. when Lindsay Shaw sent out the message: mandatory staff meeting in the banquet hall, attendance required. No one questioned it. Staff meetings were rare at Desert Pines, especially unannounced. By 4:30, the event space, usually filled with laughter and champagne toasts, buzzed with uneasy silence. Servers, bartenders, cooks, and even the grounds crew sat in rows of white folding chairs beneath the crystal chandeliers. Chase Denning stood near the back, arms crossed, clearly annoyed. "This better be quick. I have a kitchen to run," he muttered. Rachel sat 2 rows from the front, her hands in her lap, pulse thudding in her throat. Peter was nowhere to be seen. Then, from behind the heavy velvet curtain near the projector screen, Peter Langford stepped into the room. Not in his usual faded work clothes, but in a pressed navy suit, clean-shaven, his silver hair neatly combed. The transformation drew a ripple of gasps. Chase's face tightened. "What the hell is this?" he spat, already on edge. Peter walked calmly to the center of the room, microphone in hand. "Good afternoon," he began, voice firm and even. "Some of you know me as the groundskeeper, but my name is Peter Langford. I am the founder and sole owner of Desert Pines Golf Resort." The room fell dead silent. Chase scoffed, but Peter ignored him. "I've called this meeting to address a serious breach of trust that's compromised not just our business, but the dignity of the people who work here." He clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up with a security feed, clear, high-resolution footage showing Chase sneaking into the accounting office at 11:30 p.m., donning a wig, and emptying the register. "This," Peter continued, "is the unedited footage from the night Rachel Myers was accused of theft." Rachel sat frozen as every pair of eyes turned toward her. Gasps echoed around the room. Chase blanched. "This is manipulated," he snapped. "You can't—" Peter cut him off. Here's the same van making 7 unauthorized pickups, he said, cycling through footage of Chase handing off goods. Deliveries traced to your brother's restaurant in Sedona. And here, he clicked again, is the email you sent requesting security footage be altered to frame one of your staff. A murmur of outrage spread through the room. Peter didn't stop. You bullied employees, you stole a product, and worst of all, you tried to ruin someone's life to protect your scam. He turned toward Chase, expression hard as stone. You've hurt this resort, our staff, and the legacy my wife built. I won't let that continue. Police officers entered from the side door, summoned by Peter in advance. As they approached, Chase made a weak attempt to leave, but was stopped by 2 kitchen staff who stood in his way. Get your hands off me, he yelled. No one moved. The officers cuffed him, read his rights, and led him out in stunned silence. As the doors closed behind them, Peter turned back to the staff. The hard part's over. Now, we rebuild together. And for the first time in weeks, the room erupted. Not in fear, but in applause. In the days following Chase Denning's arrest, the atmosphere at Desert Pines underwent a quiet but profound transformation. The tension that once clung to the walls like humidity after a storm had lifted, replaced by a cautious sense of relief and, slowly, hope. Peter Langford didn't vanish back into boardrooms or high-rising offices. Instead, he remained present, walking the halls, speaking with staff, and inviting feedback with the humility few expected from a man of his stature. His message was clear: this isn't about recovering profits, it's about restoring purpose. Rachel returned to work the following Monday, not in her black serving uniform, but in a sleek, tailored blouse with a new name tag, Event Supervisor. When Lindsay saw her walk in, she paused, then approached with tears in her eyes. I should have spoken up, she said quietly. I let him scare me. Rachel held her gaze for a moment, then offered a small, understanding nod. You're here now. Let's do it better this time. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a start. New hires joined the team, including Chef Monica Tate, a soft-spoken culinary talent from Chicago known as much for her leadership as her cuisine. Gone were the shouted insults and thrown pans. In their place came a culture of collaboration, where line cooks gave input and servers were treated as part of the experience, not obstacles to the kitchen's ego. Dante returned behind the bar with his usual charm, offering Rachel a mock salute on her first day in management. Told you you'd be running this place. The resort even took steps to open up transparency. Weekly team briefings, anonymous suggestion forms, and a wall of recognition celebrating staff who went above and beyond. Rachel, once a scapegoat, became a symbol of resilience. Her story traveled through the staff like wildfire, inspiring quiet nods of respect, especially from those who once looked the other way. She wasn't just promoted, she was trusted. And in a place that had once punished honesty, that trust felt revolutionary. Desert Pines didn't just return to normal, it redefined it. And as guests began commenting on the warmth of the staff and the clarity of the new menu vision, one thing became clear: the real change wasn't in the kitchen, it was in the culture. And it started with the person they once tried to throw out. As the sun dipped low behind the rolling hills of the golf course, casting long golden shadows across the fairways, Rachel found Peter Langford sitting alone on a weathered bench near the rose garden his late wife had designed. The hum of the clubhouse faded in the distance, replaced by the soft rustle of palm trees and the rhythmic chirp of desert birds settling in for the night. In his hand, Peter held a glass of iced tea, condensation dripping slowly down the side. He looked peaceful. Older, yes, but lighter, as if the burden he'd been quietly carrying had finally lifted. Rachel approached with a quiet smile. It's hard to believe it's only been 3 weeks, she said. Feels like a year. Peter looked up, his expression warm. A lot can change when people decide enough is enough. She sat beside him, the desert air cooling around them. You could have exposed Chase the moment you had evidence, she said. Why go through all that trouble? Hiding in plain sight? Peter paused. Because I didn't just want to prove he was stealing. I wanted to understand why no one said anything. I needed to feel what the staff felt, the fear, the silence, the exhaustion. He looked out over the green, his eyes misty. My wife believed this place should feel like home for the people who worked here, not just those who vacationed here. Somewhere along the way, I lost that. Rachel nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. You brought it back, Peter chuckled softly. No, you did. I just watched long enough to recognize the right person to help fix it. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a slim, engraved pen. Her name shimmered in silver cursive. For your new desk, he said, and for the observations worth writing down. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sprinklers begin their evening rhythm. The clubhouse behind them glowed warm with laughter and clinking glasses. Familiar sounds, now softened by something new. Respect. As Peter stood to leave, Rachel called after him, You think people really change? He turned, a quiet smile on his face. I think people remember who they were meant to be, when someone believes in them. Then, without fanfare, the man once mistaken for a humble groundskeeper disappeared into the dusk, leaving behind a place finally worthy of his wife's name and a young woman ready to carry his future. The story of Desert Pines Golf Resort teaches us that true leadership isn't always loud. It's often quiet, observant, and grounded in integrity. Peter Langford's decision to go undercover wasn't driven by ego or revenge, but by a deep desire to reconnect with the core values his late wife built the resort upon: dignity, honesty, and community. By walking in the shoes of his employees, he uncovered not just financial corruption, but a culture of fear that had silenced good people. Rachel's journey reminds us that standing up for the truth, especially when you're alone, is never easy. But the character reveals itself in crisis. Her refusal to be intimidated, even when falsely accused, became the spark that unraveled a web of deception. In the end, it was her courage, not her title, that earned her the respect of her peers and the trust of her employer. This story affirms that integrity, when paired with persistence, can outlast even the most calculated betrayal. It's a powerful reminder that redemption is possible, not just for individuals, but for entire communities, when one person is brave enough to speak up and another is wise enough to listen.